Breakfast, no time. Lunch, meetings. By evening, you are finally home. You sit down at the table, and here it begins. First, dinner. Then, a snack. Then, something else from the fridge. And before bed, just a little again. You think, well, I basically didn't eat all day, so in the evening, it's okay. Today, I, as a nutritionist, will explain why this logic does not work physiologically. What specifically happens in the body when all calories are shifted to the evening, and why this pattern is one of the most destructive for metabolism, regardless of what exactly you eat. Let me start by describing how people who eat mainly in the evening live and why this pattern forms so naturally. Evening dominant eating is one of the most common eating patterns in modern urban life. According to chronobiology research, about 40 to 50% of people in developed countries consume more than half of their daily calories after 6 to 7 in the evening. This is not a choice, it is a consequence of the schedule. Work, commute, children, obligations, all of this pushes food to the only window when there is time, the evening. There are several characteristic stories I hear in consultations. First story, a woman, 35 years old. She leaves for work at 8 in the morning with only coffee. Lunch, 15 minutes between meetings, usually a sandwich or nothing. In the evening, from 7 to 9, a full dinner, then fruits, then nuts, then yogurt, then something else, just a little. She is surprised. I eat practically nothing during the day, but in the evening, something clicks and I can't stop. When analyzing her situation, it was precisely the pronounced hunger by evening, developed by the hypothalamus in response to the daytime deficit, that made normal portion control physiologically impossible after 6 in the evening. There is an important detail about this story. It is precisely the combination of daytime caloric restriction and evening overeating that the body perceives not as healthy intermittent fasting, but as a chronic stress signal. In response to this signal, it shifts metabolism toward fat accumulation as insurance against the next daytime famine. Second story, a man, 41 years old. He works from home, does not feel hungry until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. He drinks coffee and works, eats his first real meal around 3 to 4, then dinner at 8, then a snack before bed. He considers this normal. I just don't feel like eating in the morning. When analyzing his cortisol and insulin rhythm, a classic picture of a shifted circadian metabolic pattern. Morning cortisol does not trigger the normal appetite signal because the body is adapted to daytime hunger suppression. Third story, a woman, 28 years old. She works in a restaurant. Her shift ends at midnight. She eats after the shift, the only meal of the day. She does not feel hungry during the shift because adrenaline suppresses appetite. After the shift, she can eat for an hour without stopping. She has gained 12 kilograms in 2 years of such work, with absolutely no change in the quality of what she eats. Fourth story, a man, 52 years old. For 30 years, he has been eating mainly in the evening. He claims he always ate like this and everything was fine. But when analyzing his metabolic markers at 50, elevated triglycerides, visceral fat in the abdominal area, HbA1c at the upper limit of normal, borderline impaired fasting glucose. It was precisely the 30-year pattern of evening caloric loading that gradually formed this metabolic picture. What do all these stories have in common? Evening dominant eating is not just about time. It is about a systematic discrepancy between the eating pattern and the body's biological clock. There is important statistics about the effects of evening eating. In a large prospective study published in the International Journal of Obesity, people who consumed the majority of calories after 3 in the afternoon lost significantly less weight over 20 weeks compared to those who ate the same calories in the first half of the day, with identical caloric intake, macronutrient composition, and physical activity levels. The only difference was meal timing. It is precisely this data, the same calories, the same composition, different time, that confirms that when we eat matters no less than what we eat. Now, the mechanisms. I explain as a nutritionist, precisely and to the point. Let me start with the basics. The human body has an internal biological clock, the circadian system, that synchronizes all physiological processes with the 24-hour cycle of day and night. This includes digestion, insulin secretion, glucose uptake by cells, fat metabolism, and body temperature. It is precisely this synchronization that forms the temporal framework within which the body works most efficiently. When eating patterns conflict with this framework, problems arise. First mechanism, the circadian rhythm of insulin sensitivity. Insulin sensitivity, the ability of cells to respond to insulin and take up glucose, is not constant throughout the day. It reaches its peak in the morning and early afternoon, and significantly decreases in the evening and at night. This has been confirmed in numerous studies using glucose tolerance tests at different times of day. The same amount of carbohydrates consumed in the morning causes a significantly lower blood glucose and insulin surge than the same amount consumed in the evening. There is an important practical implication of this mechanism. A bowl of rice at noon and a bowl of rice at 10 in the evening are metabolically different meals, despite having identical caloric content and composition. The evening bowl triggers a higher insulin response, a higher glucose peak, and more pronounced fat accumulation from the same number of calories. Second mechanism, the evening surge of cortisol and ghrelin. Cortisol, the stress hormone, has its highest point in the first hour after waking. It provides a morning energy boost and activates metabolism. By evening, it should be at a minimum. But with chronic daytime stress and a lack of regular meals during the day, the cortisol curve flattens. It remains elevated in the evening when it should be low. Elevated evening cortisol does several things simultaneously. It increases appetite, especially for high-caloric, high-carbohydrate food. It slows gastric motility and intestinal peristalsis, and it directly stimulates the accumulation of visceral fat. Additionally, by evening, the level of ghrelin, the hunger hormone, reaches its daily maximum in people who have not eaten normally during the day. This is the physiological mechanism of evening overeating. It is not weak willpower, it is biology. Third mechanism, the liver, fatty acid metabolism, and nocturnal lipogenesis. After approximately 10 in the evening, the liver transitions from the active phase of processing of incoming nutrients to restoration and preparation for the night. Insulin sensitivity in liver cells also decreases significantly in the evening. When a large amount of carbohydrates and fats arrives in the liver at this time, it processes them less efficiently. More fatty acids go into storage as triglycerides rather than being oxidized for energy. There is an important detail about nocturnal lipogenesis. Lipogenesis, the synthesis of fats from carbohydrates, is controlled by the enzyme fatty acid synthase, whose activity is significantly higher in the evening and at night than in the morning. This is an evolutionarily ancient mechanism. The body senses the approach of night and switches to the conservation mode. A large evening meal directly activates this mechanism. Fourth mechanism, sleep disruption through late eating. The process of digestion itself, secretion of enzymes, motility, processing of nutrients, creates thermal and metabolic activity that interferes with falling asleep and reduces the quality of deep sleep. Studies show eating a large meal 2 hours or less before bedtime reduces the proportion of slow-wave sleep, the deepest and most restorative phase, by 15 to 20%. And here is where a vicious cycle forms. Poor sleep increases ghrelin the next morning, reduces leptin, and, most importantly, increases the body's preference for high-caloric food on the following day. So evening overeating leads to poor sleep, which leads to increased hunger the next day, which leads to overeating the following evening. Fifth mechanism, circadian desynchronisis and its systemic consequences. When the eating schedule does not match the light-dark cycle, chronobiologists speak of circadian desynchronisis, a mismatch between the internal clock and the external schedule. Shift workers who are forced to eat at night show a significantly higher incidence of metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain types of cancer compared to day workers, even with identical diet quality and caloric intake. The mechanism is clear. Cells of all organs, liver, muscles, adipose tissue, pancreas, have their own peripheral clock genes that synchronize with eating patterns. When food arrives at night, these genes receive a signal conflicting with the main clock in the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This creates internal desynchronization that disrupts metabolism at the cellular level. Sixth mechanism, the circadian advantage of morning eating. Chronobiology research demonstrates a consistent pattern. People who consume the majority of calories in the first half of the day, before 3 in the afternoon, show better metabolic results. Lower postprandial glucose, lower insulin, lower triglycerides, lower waist circumference, with identical total caloric intake. This has been shown in intervention studies where the same subjects ate the same food but at different times, and the difference in metabolic response was significant and consistent. Now about mistakes, the most common ones with evening dominant eating. Mistake 1. Thinking that I didn't eat during the day, so I can eat more in the evening. The body does not work according to the daily balance principle, in which the time of day is irrelevant. It works according to circadian rhythms, where the same calories at different times have different metabolic effects. Daytime restriction followed by evening excess is not balance. It is two metabolic stresses applied at different times. Mistake 2. Skipping breakfast because I'm not hungry in the morning. Absence of morning hunger in people with an established pattern of evening eating is not a signal from the body that it doesn't need food. It is a consequence of the shifted circadian pattern. High evening insulin and late caloric load suppress morning appetite. This is adaptation, not a constitutional feature. In most people, within 2 to 3 weeks of shifting meals toward the morning, morning appetite is restored. Mistake 3. Eating a large meal right before bed. At night, gastric motility decreases. The valve between the stomach and esophagus relaxes under the influence of hormones. A large late meal directly increases the risk of acid reflux, disrupts sleep architecture, and creates peak insulin at the lowest point of daily insulin sensitivity. The minimum recommended interval between the last meal and sleep is 2 to 3 hours. Mistake 4. Believing that the timing of eating doesn't matter if calories and composition are right. This is the main cognitive error, which numerous studies refute. Timing of eating is an independent variable that affects metabolic outcomes independently of caloric content and macronutrient composition. This has been shown in carefully controlled studies where only meal timing changed while everything else remained identical. Mistake 5. Gradually shifting dinner later and later. Dinner at 7 becomes dinner at 8, becomes dinner at 9, becomes a late snack at 11. This gradual shifting happens almost imperceptibly, but has cumulative metabolic consequences. Every 30 minutes of delay in the main meal's time worsens the body's circadian metabolic response to food. Mistake 6. Compensating for evening overeating by restricting breakfast. The classic pattern: I ate a lot in the evening, I'll eat less in the morning to compensate. This further deepens the evening dominant pattern and reinforces the daytime caloric deficit that triggers evening overeating. This is a self-reinforcing cycle that is broken only by returning early meals, not by further morning restriction. Now, what really works to correct the evening eating pattern? First, start with breakfast, even a small one. Even a small protein breakfast, an egg, a handful of nuts, Greek yogurt, begins to restore the normal morning appetite signal within 2 to 3 weeks. It is not necessary to immediately eat a full breakfast if there is no appetite. Start with 100 to 150 calories and gradually increase over several weeks. There is an important detail about the breakfast paradox. Many people skip breakfast because they are not hungry. But the absence of morning appetite is precisely the consequence of evening caloric loading, not a reason to skip breakfast. Breaking this pattern requires beginning to eat in the morning despite the absence of initial appetite. After 2 to 3 weeks, morning hunger returns naturally. Second, shift the main caloric load to the first half of the day. The goal is not to completely refuse evening food, but to shift the balance. If currently 70% of calories come in the evening and 30% during the day, try reversing the ratio. 50 to 60% before 3 in the afternoon, the rest in the evening. This shift does not require strict counting. It requires conscious prioritization of meals during the day. Third, plan daytime food in advance. Evening overeating is most often not a choice, but a consequence of the absence of food during the day. Planned lunches, prepared breakfasts, accessible healthy snacks at work. These are structural changes that solve the problem at the level of the environment, not at the level of willpower. Fourth, shift dinner earlier by 30 minutes per week. Abrupt shifts are difficult to maintain. A gradual approach, shifting dinner by 30 minutes earlier each week, allows the circadian system to adapt without stress and resistance. If dinner is currently at 9 in the evening, in 8 weeks it will be at 7, a significant metabolic shift with minimal subjective effort. Fifth, create a kitchen closed rule after a certain time. The kitchen closed after 9 in the evening rule is a simple behavioral intervention that reduces evening caloric intake in the majority of people without any conscious restriction. The rule works because it converts a constant, difficult decision, should I eat or not, into a one-time, simple rule that does not require willpower at the moment of decision. Sixth, work with the causes of evening overeating. If evening overeating is caused not only by daytime hunger, but also by stress, loneliness, boredom, or emotional regulation, these causes require their own approaches. A nutritionist for the structural component, meal planning, and timing. A psychologist for the emotional component, developing alternative strategies for emotional regulation that are not related to food. There is an important nuance about not demonizing evening eating. An evening meal, dinner, is a completely natural and physiologically justified meal. The problem is not dinner itself, but the complete shift of caloric intake to the evening in the absence of normal daytime nutrition. A dinner of 300 to 500 calories as part of a balanced day is fine. A dinner of 1,500 calories after a day of practically zero intake is a metabolic problem. It is also important to understand, for people working evening and night shifts, meal timing is determined by the work schedule, and the circadian approach must be adapted to the specific schedule rather than applied rigidly as described above. It is precisely regular consultations with a nutritionist who understands chronobiology that are relevant for this group. Evening eating is not a villain. A day without food followed by an evening feast is. 3 concrete steps. Start eating breakfast, even if small, every day for 2 weeks and observe what happens to your evening appetite. Plan and bring food to work for lunch, a meal you've prepared, not whatever's available. Shift your usual dinner time by 30 minutes and maintain this for 2 weeks before shifting it again. Your metabolism doesn't count calories, it counts time. There is a final thought about sustainable change. Shifting the eating pattern from evening dominant to distributed throughout the day is not a quick change. For most people, it takes 4 to 8 weeks for the natural appetite signals to realign with the new schedule. It is precisely patience and consistency, not a radical breakthrough, that gives a sustainable result. Every morning meal, even small, is a signal to the circadian system. Consistent repetition of this signal over weeks gradually restructures the hormonal rhythm of the whole day. There is a final word about prioritization. The most common reason for skipping daytime meals is no time. But 15 minutes for breakfast and 20 minutes for lunch, this is 35 minutes per day invested in metabolic health, the long-term effect of which is incomparable with any supplement or dietary intervention. It is precisely prioritizing regular daytime meals, not calorie counting, not restrictions, that is the most accessible and at the same time most effective structural change in nutrition for the majority of people. If this video was helpful, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Questions about meal timing and metabolism, write in the comments. I read and respond. See you in the next video.